Someone died today, not an old person, not a sick one. Someone who was just here, and you are standing there, with one question burning in your head. Where did they go? Not where did the body go. That part they understood. But the person, the thing that made them. The laugh, the voice, the way they moved. Ancient humans asked this question, every single one of them. And the answers they came up with changed everything. Here is the first thing that makes this story remarkable. Ancient humans didn't just cover their dead and walk away. They buried them with things, carefully chosen things. Not just covered them, equipped them. There's a difference, and that difference is everything. Tools for hunting, food for the journey, jewelry to wear on the other side, weapons to defend themselves with wherever they were going. Think about that for a second. You only pack supplies for a journey if you genuinely believe the journey is happening. These weren't grief rituals. These were preparations. The oldest known burial site is 300,000 years old, and what makes it even more striking is where they chose to do it. Deep inside caves, far from the entrance, far from the light. They carried bodies deep into caves, away from predators, away from the noise of the living world. That journey alone, carrying someone you loved through winding dark passages by torchlight, that is not a practical act. That is ritual. That is belief in action. They also covered bodies with red ochre, a bright red pigment the color of blood, and this wasn't a random choice. Red was the color of everything alive, blood, fire, the setting sun. By covering a dead body in the color of life, they were saying something. They were making a statement about what death actually was, not an ending, but a transition. And then there were the flowers. In a cave in what is now Iraq, archaeologists found the remains of a Neanderthal buried 60,000 years ago, surrounded by wildflowers. Someone picked those flowers, carried them to that cave, arranged them around a body, 60,000 years ago. And here is the part that stopped researchers cold. This wasn't even a Homo sapiens. This was a Neanderthal, a completely different species. Which means the question of what happens after death is older than our species. It didn't start with us. It was already there, already burning long before we arrived. So what did they actually believe? Because evidence of ritual is one thing. But what was going on inside their heads? What were they telling each other around the fire at night? The first and most widespread belief across ancient human cultures was this: the dead don't actually leave. They just become invisible. Anthropologists call this animism, the belief that everything in the world contains a spirit, not just humans, everything. Trees had spirits living inside them. Rivers had spirits moving within them. Even the rocks beneath your feet had a presence, a personality, an inner life that needed to be respected. And when a person died, their spirit didn't vanish. It simply shifted out of the visible world and into the invisible one, staying close to the places it knew, the people it loved. Imagine what that belief does for a person sitting alone by the fire after a loss. The person they loved isn't gone. They're right there, just out of sight, sitting in their usual spot, watching the same fire. This belief meant you were never truly alone after loss. The dead remained part of the community, present at meals, present during hunts, present during births. But this belief came with a warning, because spirits could be unhappy. And an unhappy spirit was something everyone in the tribe feared. A spirit whose body wasn't buried properly, still wandering, confused, unable to find its way. A spirit who was wronged or disrespected in life, angry, looking for someone to blame. This is exactly why burial rituals mattered as much as they did. They weren't just about saying goodbye. They were about getting it right, making sure the spirit left peacefully and stayed that way. The ritual was essentially a negotiation. We gave you what you need for the journey: food, tools, weapons, beauty. We honored you. We did this correctly. Now please, go and don't come back angry. But animism was only the beginning. Ancient humans didn't stop at one answer. They kept reaching, kept imagining, kept building on what they believed. And the second belief took everything further. The dead don't just become invisible, they go somewhere else entirely. Another world, another place, somewhere completely beyond what the living eye can see. And archaeological evidence suggests that ancient humans almost universally placed this other world in the sky, specifically in the stars. The stars were the ancestors. The constellations were the shapes of the people who had come before, still visible, still present, just elevated into something permanent and unreachable. When someone died, they didn't disappear, they ascended. They joined that permanent world above, and from there, they could still watch, still witness, still be part of the story. This is one of the oldest and most widespread ideas in all of human history. And when you understand what it actually did for people, you understand why it kept coming back. Culture after culture, era after era. It made loss survivable. When you look up at the night sky and believe that the person you lost is up there somewhere, watching, aware, still connected, grief becomes something you can actually carry. It gave grief a place to go. Instead of screaming into a void, you could direct your grief upward, toward a specific star, a specific presence, a specific someone who was still there in a different form. If they are up there, if they made it to that bright, permanent world above the clouds, then what we call grief is really just the distance between us. They are not gone. They are just somewhere we cannot follow yet. The third belief is the strangest one, and somehow also the most widespread of all. It shows up on every continent in cultures that had absolutely no contact with each other, which makes it one of the most fascinating mysteries in the entire history of human thought. The dead come back, not as ghosts hanging around the fire, as something completely new, a recycled soul, a spirit that enters a new form and lives again. Reincarnation. The soul recycled into a new form, back into the world, back into life, just wearing a different face. And the archaeological evidence for this belief is buried, literally, in the way ancient humans positioned the dead. From 100,000 years ago, across multiple continents, archaeologists kept finding the same thing. Bodies buried in the fetal position, knees drawn to the chest, arms folded inward, curled tight, the exact position of a baby waiting to be born. When you see that, when you realize that the shape of the buried body and the shape of a newborn baby are identical, everything shifts. They weren't burying someone, they were planting them, like a seed going into the ground, not ending, but waiting, gathering energy for the next emergence. Now here is what makes this truly remarkable. This belief appeared on every single continent. In ancient Africa, ancient Asia, ancient Europe, the ancient Americas, ancient Australia, cultures with no possible way of communicating with each other all arrived at the same idea. This wasn't a belief that traveled along trade routes or spread through contact. It was a human conclusion, something the brain arrived at independently, again and again, when confronted with the fact of death. Something about death made the human mind reach for rebirth, every time, without fail. But ancient humans didn't just hold these beliefs privately, quietly, inside their own heads. They built systems around them. They created roles, rituals, entire structures of society dedicated to managing the relationship between the living and the dead. They appointed someone whose entire job was to cross between the worlds, to go where the living couldn't go, speak to the dead, and bring back information the tribe needed. The shaman, found in virtually every ancient culture ever studied. The person who stood at the boundary between worlds and could move between them. To get there, they used everything available to them. Rhythmic drumming that went on for hours, specific plants that altered perception, and the sheer physical exhaustion of ritual dancing until the ordinary world fell away and the spirit world opened up. And from those altered states, they came back with information. Specific, practical, actionable information that the tribe treated with complete seriousness. Your grandmother says move camp before winter comes. Your father says a drought is coming. Start storing food now. The river spirit is angry about the fishing. Give something back. The dead were not gone from tribal life. They were advisors, a council that had access to perspectives and knowledge the living simply couldn't have. A view from above, outside of time, free from the panic of survival. When you understand that, you start to see what the shaman really was. Not a superstitious figure performing meaningless ritual. A leader, a diplomat, the person responsible for maintaining the most important relationship the tribe had, the one with its own past. These beliefs didn't just live inside people's heads. They changed behavior in ways that were concrete, measurable, and genuinely consequential for the survival of the group. First, they made people cooperate better. When you genuinely believe that the people who loved you are watching everything you do, your behavior changes. You share more fairly. You work harder for the group. You think twice before taking the easy, selfish option. Second, these beliefs created the first stories, because the moment you believe in an afterlife, you need to describe it. You need to tell people what it looks like, what the rules are, how to get there safely. And those descriptions, passed from mouth to ear around firelight, were the very first narratives in human history. Third, they created the first art, the cave paintings that still survive today, those extraordinary images pressed onto stone walls by firelight 40,000 years ago. Most researchers now believe they weren't decoration. They were communication, messages to the spirit world, or records of journeys made between worlds. And fourth, they created the first music. The oldest instruments ever found are bone flutes and skin drums, and they were found at burial sites. Music began as a bridge, a frequency sent out across the boundary between worlds, trying to reach someone on the other side. Everything we now call culture, art, music, story, ritual, ceremony, all of it traces back to one thing: the refusal to accept that the people we loved were simply gone. It all started as a conversation with the dead. Here is the honest truth. We still don't know what happens after death. 200,000 years of asking, and we are no closer to a definitive answer than Den was standing beside that empty patch of grass. But here is what I think is remarkable about ancient humans. They didn't let the not knowing paralyze them. They didn't collapse under the weight of the unanswerable question. They did something far more interesting with it. They turned the uncertainty into connection, into togetherness. The shared not knowing became the thing that pulled people closer together, gathered around fires, telling stories, holding each other, looking up at the same stars. They turned it into art that survived 40,000 years, into music that still makes us feel things we can't explain, into stories that still live in the bones of every narrative ever told. The question of what comes after death is what separated us from every other creature on this planet. It's what made us build, create, reach, imagine, connect. It's what made us more than animals that simply survive. And we are still asking it. Every funeral, every night we look up at the stars, every time we lose someone and stand there in the same silence Den stood in, wondering where they went. Maybe the asking is the point. Maybe the question itself, the fact that we care enough to ask it, that we refuse to just accept the silence, is the most human thing about us. Ancient humans looked at the same darkness we look at. They had no telescopes, no science, no books, just their minds, their grief, and their refusal to believe that love simply ends. And from that refusal, everything.